You know, sometimes the cruelest words don't come from strangers. They come from the ones you brought into this world. My name is Ruth Henderson. I'm 70 years old. And before I begin, let me know down in the comments where you're watching from. I love hearing your stories. Now, let me tell you mine. I had always considered myself fairly healthy for my age. A little arthritis in my knees, some shortness of breath if I walked too fast, but nothing I couldn't manage. I still cooked, I still drove myself to the store, and I still liked tending my little garden every morning. Nothing about me felt finished. But my son, Daniel, didn't see it that way. It was a routine doctor's appointment, just a yearly checkup. I remember sitting on that crinkly white paper they put on exam tables, tugging at the sleeves of my cardigan because the room was always too cold. Daniel sat in the corner, scrolling on his phone, looking impatient. Like bringing me, there was a chore he couldn't wait to check off his list. The doctor walked in, cheerful as ever, with my chart in his hands. He asked about my medications, how I was feeling. The usual. I answered as best I could, though Daniel kept sighing every few minutes, like he wanted it to be over. And then, as the doctor adjusted his glasses and said he'd recommend some follow-up tests just to be safe, Daniel spoke. Loud enough for me and the doctor to hear, but with that dismissive tone only a child can use when he thinks his parents' time is already up. He said, "Don't bother, Doc. She's at the end anyway." I felt the words stab through me harder than any needle or diagnosis ever could. The doctor glanced at me quickly, his face a mix of surprise and discomfort. I looked down at my hands, at the faint blue veins under my skin, and for the first time, I felt small. Like I was just a body taking up space, not the woman who had raised that very same man sitting in the corner. I wanted to speak, to tell the doctor to go ahead with the tests, to remind Daniel that I was still here, still alive. But my throat tightened, and nothing came out. We left the office in silence. Daniel didn't even notice the tears I was blinking back. He was too busy talking on his phone, making plans for later, as if the sentence he had just delivered about me being at the end meant nothing at all. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in my bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing his words again and again. At the end. Was that how he really saw me? A burden, a ticking clock, a name waiting to be etched into stone. I thought back to all the times I'd sacrificed for him. Working double shifts at the diner when he was a boy so he could have new shoes for school. Putting off buying myself a winter coat so he could afford the suit he needed for his first job interview. Helping with his down payment when he and his wife wanted their first house. Every step of his life, I had been there. And now? He wanted the doctor not to bother. He had already decided my story was over. But lying there in the dark, I realized something. Maybe Daniel thought I was at the end, but I didn't. My body might ache, my hands might tremble, but my mind was sharp. My will was still strong. And if he thought he could erase me before my time, he had another thing coming. I decided right then. I wasn't going to let him or anyone bury me before I was ready. If he wanted to see me as done, I'd make sure the only thing done was his access to everything I'd worked for. That was the night the fire lit inside me. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for certain. I was going to bother. And I was going to make sure Daniel regretted ever saying those words. The thing about betrayal is that once you hear it, once you see it for what it is, you start noticing every little crack that was already there. After that doctor's visit, I began paying attention. The silences at dinner. The whispered conversations when they thought I was asleep. The way my daughter-in-law, Tasha, would look at me like I was a piece of furniture taking up too much room. At first, I thought I was imagining it. But no, they had already started seeing me as a problem to be managed, not a person to be loved. One morning, I came into the kitchen to make myself tea. I caught the tail end of their conversation. Tasha's voice was low, sharp. Once she's gone, we'll finally be able to fix this place up. Imagine what it'll be worth in this market, Daniel's response. A tired chuckle. Yeah, I know. Just be patient. I froze. My tea bag dangled in my hand. Forgotten. Once she's gone. They weren't talking about some distant future. They were already counting the house, the walls I had painted myself, the floors I had scrubbed after long days at work, the garden where I had buried my late husband's ashes. To them, it was just property. To me, it was my entire life. I slipped quietly out of the room before they saw me. My hands shook, not from age, not from arthritis, but from rage. It got worse from there. A week later, I noticed my mail sitting on the counter already opened. Bank statements, insurance notices, even a letter about property tax. I never left my envelopes unopened. Daniel shrugged when I asked. I thought I'd save you the trouble, Mum. You always take so long to read these things. But it wasn't kindness. He was checking, monitoring, as if I wasn't capable of handling my own business anymore. That night, I went through my desk drawers. Some papers were out of order. My spare checkbook was missing a page. My heart thudded. Was I paranoid? Or were they already trying to get ahead of me? The unease turned into certainty. A few days later, when I overheard Tasha on the phone, she was talking to someone about liquidating assets and timelines. She caught me watching from the hallway and ended the call abruptly. Smiled that fake smile she always wore like bad perfume. Oh, Ruth, don't mind me. Just chatting with a friend about real estate. But her eyes gave her away. They darted, calculating, already picturing a life without me in it. It's a peculiar feeling, realizing your own family sees you as a line on a balance sheet. I'd always believed blood was thicker than water. But I was learning fast. Greed is thicker than blood. The breaking point of that week came on a Sunday afternoon. I was sitting in the living room, knitting. Daniel and Tasha were in the dining room, talking in hushed tones. But the walls in that house were thin. Should we start talking to a realtor? Tasha asked. Not yet, Daniel muttered. But soon. She's not going to be around forever. There it was again. That countdown they had already started in their heads. I put down my knitting and stared at the photo on the mantel. It was of me and my late husband, George, on the day we signed the mortgage for that very house. We had been so proud, so full of hope. We built a life there, raised Daniel there, fought and made up and laughed until we cried within those walls. And now, my son, the boy whose hand I had held through scraped knees and heartbreaks, was planning to sell it out from under me before my heart had even stopped beating. That was when something in me hardened. I wasn't ready to confront them yet. No, I knew I had to be smart, quiet, careful. But I also knew I wasn't imagining things anymore. Daniel and Tasha were already circling like vultures. And vultures don't stop circling unless you scare them off. So I decided that if they were planning ahead, I would too. Only my plan wasn't going to make their lives easier. It was going to make them wish they had never underestimated me, because I may have been 70. I may have had aches in my knees and wrinkles around my eyes, but I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. And if they thought I was, well, soon they'd learn the difference between being at the end and just getting started. When you've been written off as at the end, people stop watching you closely. They think you're too weak, too tired, too forgetful to notice what's going on. That mistake would be Daniel and Tasha's downfall. After overhearing their whispers and seeing my opened mail, I spent a few days in silence. Not because I was afraid, but because I was thinking, planning. I kept my routine the same. Knitting in the evenings, making my tea, tending my garden. On the outside, I looked like the same old woman they believed I was. But inside, I was on fire. One morning, As I watered the roses George had planted years ago, I thought about him. He had worked 2 jobs to buy that house, put every spare dollar into keeping it. He had trusted me to hold on to it after he was gone. And here I was, watching our own son and his wife circle it like scavengers. The thought made me sick. That's when I made my decision. If Daniel thought I was at the end, then I'd spend whatever time I had left making sure he didn't inherit a single thing of mine without my permission. The very next day, I made an appointment, not with a doctor, but with a lawyer. Her name was Judith Klein, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp glasses and sharper instincts. I had known her years ago through a friend, but I hadn't thought about her in ages. When I called her office and explained a little about my situation, her voice on the phone was calm and steady. "Mrs. Henderson," she said, "you've done the right thing. Let's talk." I dressed carefully for that appointment, wore my best navy skirt and white blouse, brushed my thinning hair back into a neat bun. I didn't want to look frail when I walked into that office. I wanted to look like a woman who meant business. Judith welcomed me in, shook my hand firmly, and listened as I told her everything. The doctor's appointment, Daniel's words, the whispers about selling the house, the opened mail, the missing checks. Her expression never changed, but I saw the flicker of anger in her eyes. "They're trying to position themselves early," she said when I finished. "It's more common than you'd think. Adult children assuming control before their parents are even gone. Sometimes by force, sometimes by manipulation. You still have full capacity, Ruth. Legal, financial, everything. That means you can decide today to protect yourself, protect myself." The phrase settled in my chest like an anchor. Judith leaned forward. "You have options. You can transfer deeds, close or restructure accounts, create a living trust that makes it impossible for anyone to touch your assets without your approval. And if you really want to send a message, you can do all of this without telling them a thing. By the time they find out, it'll be too late." A chill ran down my spine, not of fear, but of excitement. For the first time since Daniel's cruel words in that exam room, I felt power again. So I said yes. The first thing Judith suggested was the house. "Right now, everything is in your name, correct?" "Yes," I said. "Good. We'll draft a transfer that ensures no one can contest ownership while you're alive, and we'll adjust your will so it's crystal clear what happens afterward." When she placed the paperwork in front of me, I felt my hand tremble as I picked up the pen. Not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. Signing that first line wasn't just about ink and paper. It was reclaiming myself. I pressed my signature onto the page, and as the pen moved, I imagined Daniel's smug face when he realized the house he had already pictured selling was no longer his to touch. We spent hours going through the details, accounts to close, utilities to shift, insurance to rewrite. Judith was meticulous, walking me through every step, making sure I understood. She wasn't just my lawyer in that moment. She was my ally. By the time I left her office, I felt taller, straighter, stronger. I took the bus home, sat by the window, and for the first time in months, I smiled. Daniel and Tasha thought I was drifting quietly toward the end, but they had no idea I had just begun writing the chapter that would turn their world upside down. And the best part? They wouldn't even see it coming. The trick to winning a battle no one knows you're fighting is to look like you've already lost. After my meeting with Judith, I walked back into that house with a brand new secret burning in my chest. The deed transfer had been signed. My accounts were already being rearranged. The wheels were turning. But to Daniel and Tasha, I was still the same old woman with aching knees and trembling hands. So I let them think it. When Tasha fussed about me leaving crumbs on the counter, I just nodded and muttered an apology. When Daniel rolled his eyes at how long it took me to shuffle from the couch to the kitchen, I laughed weakly and said, "I know. I'm slow these days. Every insult, every little jab, I let it roll off me like water, because the more they believed I was slipping, the less they suspected that I was outmaneuvering them with every passing day. Judith and I worked quickly. She helped me close the joint savings account Daniel had pushed me to open years ago, for convenience. The truth was, I had barely used it, but he had started making small withdrawals, always with some excuse. Groceries, gas, helping out with bills. Judith made sure that account was emptied and closed, with the funds moved into one only I had access to. Then came the utilities. Daniel had his name on several: electric, gas, water. It had been his idea originally to help manage things. I didn't see it then, but it had been a way to position himself as the gatekeeper. Judith explained that as the homeowner, I had every right to remove him. So I did. With a few phone calls and a lot of paperwork, those bills were transferred back into my name only. The irony made me smile. He thought I couldn't handle mail, couldn't keep track of numbers. But here I was, reclaiming every piece of control he thought he had. I played my role at home carefully. One evening, I asked Daniel for help changing a light bulb in the hallway, even though I could have done it myself if I'd grabbed the step stool. He sighed, muttered something about how helpless I was, and changed it for me. Meanwhile, in my purse, tucked between tissues and a pack of mints, was a folder filled with freshly notarized documents, proof that I wasn't helpless at all. Another time, I pretended to forget which day the trash went out. Tasha laughed, shaking her head. "She's getting worse, Danny." I bit my tongue so hard I tasted blood. If only she knew that earlier that day, I'd been at the bank closing a CD account they had been eyeing, rolling the funds into a trust with Judith's oversight. The crueler they became, the calmer I grew, because every jab, every snicker, every dismissive glance only fueled me. The best act of all came one Saturday when they had some friends over for drinks. I stayed in my room mostly, not wanting to socialize. But as I went to the kitchen for water, I overheard their laughter. "Honestly," Tasha was saying, "I give her a year, maybe 2. And then we'll finally be able to redo the kitchen. I already have the tiles picked out." Her friends giggled. One of them asked Daniel if he thought I'd leave them much. He shrugged, smug as ever. "Yeah, enough. I've been handling most of her stuff already anyway." I almost laughed out loud right there in the hallway. If only they knew that every document they thought they'd inherit had been rewritten. Every dollar they counted on was no longer theirs to touch. That night, after they went to bed, I sat alone in the living room, the lamp casting a soft glow over the photo albums on the coffee table. I flipped through pages of Daniel's childhood, his toothless grin in 2nd grade, his awkward teenage years, his proud smile on graduation day. My heart ached, because I still loved him. He was my son. But love doesn't blind you forever. I whispered into the quiet room. "You wrote me off too soon, Danny." And I knew the time was coming when they would finally learn the truth. Judith said patience was key. Let them keep believing. Let them keep underestimating me. Because the day I pulled the rug out from under them, the fall would be devastating. And oh, how I was beginning to look forward to it. There's a kind of silence that settles in a house when you know you're no longer seen as the owner, but as the occupant. Like you're just borrowing space until the real people move in. That's what my home began to feel like. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find 2 strangers in my dining room. A man and a woman, middle-aged, holding clipboards and wearing polite smiles. Tasha was walking them around like a tour guide. "And over here you'll see the backyard. Plenty of room for kids to play. It just needs a little landscaping. But nothing major." I froze in the doorway. "What's going on here?" Tasha turned, her smile tight. "Oh, Ruth. Don't worry, they're just friends of mine. They work in real estate. I was showing them the property." "The property?" I repeated. "This is my home." Daniel appeared behind her, running a hand through his hair. "Mum, relax. We're just thinking ahead. You know, planning for the future." The man and woman exchanged an awkward glance, clearly sensing the tension. I stood there, my heart pounding, my hands gripping the back of a chair to steady myself. Planning for the future. That's what they called it. Showing my home. My home. As if I were already gone. I managed a brittle smile, muttered something about needing tea, and retreated to the kitchen. I didn't want to scream in front of strangers, but inside I was shaking with fury. Later that evening, after the guests had left, I heard them talking in the living room. "The market's hot right now," Tasha said. "If we can list within the year, we'll make a killing." Daniel sighed. "We just have to be patient. She can't hang on forever." I pressed my back against the wall, tears streaming down my face. They were talking about me like I was a rotting tree they couldn't wait to cut down. And something snapped. I remembered George's voice, years ago, when we'd argued about taking out a second mortgage. He had said, "This house is our legacy, Ruth. Don't let anyone take it from us." That memory was the final push I needed. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting him too. His sweat, his sacrifice, his love. It was all in these walls. And I refused to let Daniel and Tasha sell it like some prize cow. The next morning, I called Judith. My voice was calm, but she could hear the steel in it. "It's time. I want to do everything." All at once, she didn't hesitate. "Good. We'll move fast." We met that afternoon in her office. She spread the paperwork out across her desk. Wills, trusts, account closures, insurance transfers. "This will cut them out of everything," she explained. "They won't be able to touch a dime. Not the house, not the savings, not even the utilities. When they try, they'll hit a wall." I stared at the stack of documents. It looked like an avalanche of paper, but to me, it was freedom. As I signed each page, I felt lighter, stronger. The pen scratched against the paper like a sword slicing through chains. One signature transferred my retirement fund into a private trust. Another redirected my life insurance policy. Another closed the last joint account Daniel had access to. By the end of the session, my hand ached, but my spirit soared. Judith smiled at me. "You've done it, Ruth. They can't touch you now." I leaned back in the chair, letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. For weeks, I had felt like prey. But now, I was the hunter. That night, I returned home and played my part once again. I let my steps drag a little heavier across the floor. I let Tasha sigh about how forgetful I was when I asked her twice about dinner. Daniel muttered something about doctors and nursing homes, and I simply nodded, as if I hadn't heard. Inside, though, I was smiling, because I knew the day was coming when their smug little world would come crashing down. And when it did, I'd be right there to watch. The breaking point had come, not just for me, but for them. They just didn't know it yet. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I was in the kitchen, sipping my coffee and enjoying the quiet, when Daniel's voice cut through, the air like a whip. "What do you mean the account is closed?" I set my cup down and leaned against the counter. His voice carried from the living room, louder with every second. "Yes, this is Daniel Henderson. I've been managing my mother's finances. There must be a mistake. The joint savings..." A pause. Then his tone shifted, sharp with disbelief. "Transferred? To where? No, that's impossible. She wouldn't know how to..." I almost laughed right then. Oh, Daniel, always underestimating me. There was a long silence, then his voice dropped to a hiss. "Who authorized this?" I could imagine the bank representative's answer. "Your mother." When he hung up, the slam of the phone rattled the frame of a family photo on the wall. He stormed into the kitchen, his face flushed, his jaw clenched so hard I thought his teeth might crack. "What did you do?" he demanded. I raised my eyebrows. calm as ever. I had some business to take care of. You closed the accounts. His voice was nearly a roar. All of them. And the insurance. Do you know what you've done? Do you have any idea how reckless that is? I took a slow sip of my coffee. Reckless would be leaving everything in your hands. His face darkened. For a moment, I saw the boy he used to be, red-faced when caught lying about breaking a window. Only this time, he wasn't a child, and the stakes weren't a broken pane of glass. Tasha entered then, her eyes wide with false innocence. What's going on? Daniel wheeled on her. She moved everything. The house, the money, the insurance. It's all gone. Tasha's eyes darted to me, narrowing. Gone. To where? I set my cup down gently, deliberately. To a trust. A trust you'll never touch. Not now. Not ever. Her lips pressed into a thin line. You can't do that. You're not well. You're not thinking clearly. I chuckled, the sound dry and sharp. Oh, I've never thought more clearly in my life. Daniel slammed his hand on the counter, making the mug jump. We were trying to help you. Help me? I snapped, the calm mask slipping. By taking my home? By planning to sell the roof over my head before I'm even gone? By calling me dead while I sat in a doctor's office listening? That's not help, Daniel. That's betrayal. The silence that followed was thick, almost suffocating. I could see the gears turning in his head, trying to piece together how his mother, the woman he thought was frail and naive, had outmaneuvered him. Finally, he muttered, You've ruined everything. I leaned forward, my voice low and steady. No, Daniel. I've saved everything. Your father built this life with his hands, his sweat, his love, and I won't let you sell it off for pocket change. Tasha's veneer cracked. This isn't fair. We've put up with so much. We've put up with me. I cut her off, my voice sharp. You mean the woman who raised the man you married? Who gave you both a home, meals, comfort? You've put up with nothing, Tasha. You've schemed, and you've waited, and you thought I was too old, too tired, too blind to see it. But you were wrong. Daniel stood there, chest heaving, fists clenched, as though he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. For the first time in years, I felt tall. Not hunched, not diminished, not disposable, but strong. I straightened my back and looked them both squarely in the eye. From now on, this house is mine alone. You don't control my money, my accounts, or my future. You don't get to decide when my story ends. I do. Tasha turned away, muttering under her breath. Daniel just stared at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. But it wasn't recognition in his eyes. It was fear. And I savored it. Because he finally understood. The mother he'd dismissed as a burden had just pulled the ground out from beneath his feet. The phone rang again, startling us all. Daniel glanced at the caller ID. The bank, calling back. He didn't answer. Instead, he sank into a chair, his head in his hands. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel pity for my son. I felt justice. After the call from the bank, the house went silent. It was the kind of silence you could slice with a knife, heavy and awkward, broken only by the sound of the clock ticking in the hallway. Daniel sat slumped at the table, his head in his hands. Tasha paced the floor like a caged cat, muttering curses under her breath. I stood at the sink, rinsing my coffee cup as calmly as if nothing had happened. Inside, though, my chest buzzed with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just relief, not just vindication. Power. For years I'd been told I was fragile, outdated, a burden. I'd let their whispers and sighs eat away at me, convincing me I was smaller than I was. But now I felt every inch of myself. I turned, drying my hands on a towel. It's done, I said simply. Daniel looked up, his face pale. What are we supposed to do now? That's not my problem, I replied. You made your bed. Now you'll lie in it. He flinched at the coldness in my tone. Maybe he'd expected me to soften at the last moment, to take pity on him, the way I always had. But that woman, the one who covered his mistakes, who excused his selfishness, she was gone. Tasha stopped pacing and faced me. "You're cruel," she spat. "We opened our home to you." I laughed, cutting her off. "Your home? You mean my home? The one George and I built, the one you were already trying to sell from under me. Don't twist it, Tasha. You weren't my caretakers. You were vultures circling overhead, waiting for me to collapse." She stiffened, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. The following weeks were awkward, to say the least. Daniel and Tasha tiptoed around me, no longer bold enough to bark demands or whisper insults. They still lived under my roof, but the dynamic had shifted. They weren't predators anymore. They were squatters, tolerated, but never trusted. Eventually, they packed up and left. No big speech, no tearful goodbye, just boxes in the trunk and a slammed door. I stood at the window, watching them drive away, and felt lighter. The house was quiet again, but this time, it was my quiet, my sanctuary, my victory. I spent the days that followed walking through each room, touching the walls, opening closets, pulling out old photo albums. George's smile beamed from the pages. His voice echoed in my mind. "Don't let anyone take it from us." "I didn't, George," I whispered. "I kept it safe. For both of us, and I felt him with me, as strong as ever." Looking back, I realized something important. The real betrayal wasn't just in Daniel's words. "Don't bother. She's at the end." It wasn't just in Tasha's smirk when she thought she'd won. It was in how easily they dismissed me, how quickly they reduced me from a woman, a mother, a partner, to a dying body they could cash in on. But I am more than that. I always was. And so are you. If you're listening to my story right now, maybe from your own kitchen, maybe from a cozy chair, maybe from somewhere far away, I want you to remember this. Never let anyone tell you your worth is gone just because you've reached a certain age. They may see wrinkles. They may hear slower steps. But what they don't see, what they can never take, is the fire inside you, the wisdom, the love, the strength that built a lifetime. Don't let anyone write your ending for you. Hold the pen yourself. I stood up to my son. I closed accounts. I moved deeds. I pulled the rug out from under people who thought I was too weak to fight. And if I can do it, at 70 years old, with nothing but a good lawyer and a steady hand, so can you. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about reclaiming dignity, about drawing a line in the sand and saying, enough. I may have lost Daniel, at least the version of him I thought I knew, but I gained something greater. I gained peace. I gained freedom. And I gained the knowledge that when the world tried to bury me, I dug my way out with my own 2 hands. So wherever you're watching from, whether it's your living room, your phone, or somewhere in between, take my story with you. Let it remind you that you're never at the end until you decide you are. Because in the end, it wasn't the doctor's words or Daniel's betrayal that defined me. It was my choice to stand up and fight. And that, my friends, is the only ending I'll ever accept.